The courtroom was silent, except for the distant ticking of the wall clock. Every seat was filled. Reporters, attorneys, and curious locals sat forward, waiting for the young woman to speak. Her name was Elena Hayes, only 22 years old, but the weight she carried in her eyes made her seem older. She stood quietly beside her lawyer, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. Her brown hair was tied back into a simple bun, and her oversized jacket seemed out of place in the summer heat. The case had stirred public interest for weeks. The girl who refused to testify. Headlines had called her stubborn, dramatic, even unstable. But no one knew the truth. Not really. Judge Raymond Alden, a stern man in his 60s, adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Elena. "Miss Hayes," he said firmly but not unkindly, "you are being asked again to remove your jacket, so the court may proceed." Elena hesitated. Her breathing grew shallow. Her lawyer leaned toward her and whispered something, but she didn't respond. Her eyes remained locked on the floor. "Miss Hayes," the judge repeated, this time a little more sternly, "you are holding up court proceedings. This is your third refusal. I must remind you, if you don't comply, I'll do it," Elena whispered, so softly that even the stenographer looked up, uncertain. Then, with trembling fingers, Elena reached for the zipper. The courtroom held its breath. She pulled the jacket open slowly, revealing the plain white T-shirt underneath. But what stopped everything? What made the judge's mouth fall slightly open? What made even the opposing counsel blink in disbelief? Were the scars on her arms. Dozens of them, some old and faded, others newer, angry and red. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman in the second row covered her mouth. Judge Alden looked at her, stunned. "Miss Hayes, what happened to you?" Elena finally looked up. Her voice was steadier now, eyes glassy but clear. "This," she said, raising her scarred arms, "is why I couldn't speak before. Because every time I did, someone made sure I regretted it." And in that moment, the entire courtroom changed. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy, like the room itself was struggling to breathe. Judge Alden leaned back slowly, his expression unreadable, but his knuckles were white from gripping the edge of his bench. Elena's lawyer, a soft-spoken woman named Claire Bennett, stepped closer to her. "You don't have to do this alone," she whispered. Elena nodded but didn't lower her arms. Across the room, the prosecutor, a man named Mr. Denton, cleared his throat and stood. "Your Honor," he began cautiously, "we weren't made aware of any physical evidence of abuse. Had this been disclosed earlier?" Claire cut in sharply, her voice controlled but icy. "Because she was terrified, Mr. Denton. She wasn't just afraid of testifying. She was afraid no one would believe her. Like you didn't believe her 3 weeks ago. Like the police didn't when she first reported the incident." The judge raised a hand, signaling them both to stop. "Elena," he said gently now, "can you tell the court who did this to you?" Elena's lips trembled. Her hands lowered slowly, and she clutched the edge of the table for support. The courtroom leaned forward again, every breath held. "My foster father," she said quietly, "Dennis Kroll." A stunned murmur rolled through the room, not because his name was unknown, but because Dennis Kroll was a respected local businessman, a man who had donated generously to the community. He had even sponsored scholarships at the high school Elena once attended. "He said no one would believe me," she added, "that even if I screamed, the world would call me crazy. I started hurting myself because it felt like the only pain I could control." A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. She didn't look weak anymore, just broken and incredibly brave. Judge Alden took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "This changes the nature of the proceedings entirely." As he spoke, 2 reporters rushed out of the room, their faces pale, phones already in hand. For the first time in weeks, Elena didn't feel invisible. She felt heard, but she also knew this was just the beginning. Outside the courthouse, the story spread like wildfire. News vans lined the street. Headlines flipped overnight. From uncooperative witness delays trial to brave survivor speaks out against prominent figure. Inside, Elena sat alone in a quiet side room. Her jacket was folded on the table, untouched. Claire stood near the window, speaking in hushed tones with a trauma counselor who had arrived after the hearing. Elena stared at her arms. For years, she'd hidden them, not just the scars, but the memories behind them. Now they were out in the open. Everyone knew. And yet, oddly, she felt lighter. The door opened, and a soft knock followed. Judge Alden stepped in, his robe removed, replaced by a simple gray vest. He looked different without the bench between them, not intimidating, just tired. "Miss Hayes," he said gently. "May I sit?" Elena nodded, surprised. "I wanted to speak with you directly," he said, folding his hands. "What you did today took enormous courage. I've seen hundreds of cases in this courtroom, but very few people have ever stood up the way you did." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Still am." "That's what makes it courageous," he replied. "Fear doesn't cancel bravery. It defines it." She looked down. "Do you think they'll believe me now?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned forward. "Do you believe yourself now?" Her eyes lifted slowly. The question caught her off guard, but it cut deeper than anything else that day. I think I'm starting to," she whispered. The judge nodded. "Then that's the most important step." As he stood to leave, he paused. "Kroll will be subpoenaed immediately. His connections won't protect him from the truth. Not anymore." After he left, Claire re-entered, holding a folder. "They're reopening the investigation," she said. "This time with real eyes on it. No more silence." Elena looked outside the window. Protesters had already begun to gather, some holding signs with her name. Others just stood silently in solidarity. For the first time in years, Elena wasn't hiding, and the world was finally watching. The next day, Elena woke to a dozen missed calls and a phone buzzing nonstop. News outlets were asking for interviews, advocacy groups were reaching out, and strangers from across the country were sending messages of support. But it wasn't the attention that mattered most. It was the silence from Dennis Kroll. He hadn't made a public statement. No denial, no explanation, not even through his lawyer. And that silence was louder than any headline. Claire picked her up at 10 a.m. They were headed back to the courthouse, not for testimony yet, but for a protective order hearing. Elena sat in the passenger seat, nervously picking at the hem of her sleeve. "You okay?" Claire asked without taking her eyes off the road. "I don't know," Elena replied honestly. "Part of me still thinks he'll find a way out of this." Claire glanced at her. "He won't. Not this time. Not with the scars. Not with your voice finally out there. But what if they still don't care?" Elena's voice cracked. "What if they think I did it to myself for attention?" Claire pulled the car over, shifting into park. She turned to face her fully. "Elena, listen to me. They care. And even if there are people who doubt you, they're not the ones who get to decide your worth. The truth isn't a popularity contest. It's the truth." Elena blinked hard, holding back tears. Then she nodded, and Claire started driving again. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere had shifted. Officers nodded respectfully as Elena passed. One even whispered, "Thank you for speaking up." It stunned her. The hearing was brief but tense. Kroll's attorney argued for delay, citing mental distress and public persecution. But the judge denied the motion. Outside the courtroom, as they exited, Claire handed Elena a small folder. Inside were printed photos of other girls, former foster children who had stayed with Kroll over the years. "3 more came forward this morning," Claire said softly. "They saw your story. Said they thought no one would believe them either." Elena stared at the photos, her heart pounding. She wasn't the only one. She was the first, but not the last. Elena sat on the edge of her bed that night, staring at the folder Claire had given her. The faces of the other girls haunted her, not because they were strangers, but because she saw herself in every one of them. The same hollow eyes, the same forced smiles, the same silence. They'd all lived on the same roof, trusted the same man, and carried the same scars, just in different places. Her phone buzzed again, another message from someone she didn't know. This one read, Because of you, I told my mom what happened. Thank you. Elena closed her eyes, overwhelmed. She hadn't meant to be anyone's hero. She had just wanted the pain to stop. The next morning, Claire picked her up again. Today wasn't about hearings or interviews. It was something else entirely. Where are we going? Elena asked as the car rolled past downtown. You'll see, Claire said with a faint smile. They pulled up in front of a small red brick building with a banner that read, Safe Haven, Support Center for Survivors. Inside, the air smelled of lavender and fresh paint. The walls were soft shades of blue, and the furniture was warm and welcoming. Nothing like the cold courtrooms Elena had spent the past weeks in. A woman approached them, introducing herself as Michelle, the center's director. We're opening a new program, she said, smiling. It'll be named after you. The Elena Hayes Initiative, a space for young survivors of abuse to find their voice, just like you did. Elena blinked. Me? Michelle nodded. You're the reason 3 more girls are safe now, and maybe hundreds more after that. For a second, Elena couldn't breathe. All the pain, all the fear, it hadn't been for nothing. It had become something bigger than her. Later, sitting in the center's garden, Elena ran her fingers over the scars on her arms. For so long, they had felt like chains. But now they felt different. They were still there, but they no longer screamed. They whispered. You made it, they said. You're still here. And finally, you matter. The trial began 2 weeks later. The courtroom looked the same, but everything inside Elena had changed. She didn't shake when she walked in. She didn't hide her arms. She didn't flinch when Dennis Kroll entered the room in his polished suit, looking as calm as ever, like nothing was wrong. But this time he was the one on trial. Reporters filled every seat, and cameras rolled from outside the windows. The judge presiding now wasn't Alden. He had recused himself to avoid bias. But a younger woman named Judge Morales, known for a firm hand in abuse cases. Elena took the stand on the second day. The courtroom held its breath again, just like it had the first time. But this time, she didn't whisper. She looked straight ahead, her voice steady. He told me I owed him, that no one else wanted me, that speaking up would ruin everything. She paused, swallowing hard, then continued. He hurt me, over and over. And every time I tried to leave, he reminded me who paid for my clothes, my school books, even the food I ate. So I stayed, and I stayed silent. Across the aisle, Kroll's expression didn't change, but his lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Claire followed with her closing argument, painting a clear timeline of abuse, cover-ups, and manipulation, supported now by 4 additional survivors, all who had lived in Kroll's home over the years. The verdict came in faster than anyone expected. The jury deliberated for just 3 hours. Guilty. On 6 counts of felony assault, child endangerment, and witness intimidation. Elena didn't cry. She didn't smile either. She just sat still, letting the words sink in. Justice didn't erase the past, but it finally gave it weight. It finally made it real in the eyes of the world. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Not reporters this time, but survivors, counselors, and strangers holding signs that read, "We believe you." Elena walked through them quietly, not as a victim, but as someone who had turned pain into purpose. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel ashamed. She felt free.